Welcome to Behind the Kingdom with Johnny Gentleman, a podcast about drag kings, things, and everything in between, talking about the struggles of being a drag performer in a drag queen world. Hey everybody, this is Johnny Gentleman. I am here with the amazing DC King, Mr. Neuro Cosmos. Give it up for him. Oh my God, if you don't know who Neuro is a DC drag king, producer, disabled artist, and activist. You are the flaming drag artist of DC and producer of Disabled Delight, which is DC's new all disabled drag show. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yes. So please tell the people who Neuro is.
So thank you, Johnny, for having me on your podcast. And I really looking forward to this conversation. As you said, I am the flaming drag autist of DC, here to neuroqueer your universe. I am autistic, multiply disabled, transmask, and Jewish drag king. I would say one of the best ways to describe Neuro Cosmos is that I create him to essentially be like a future version of myself. So he is not a character that I've created who is different from me, but he's also me imagining a future version of myself that exists, and imagining and manifesting a future of disabled trans liberation. And Neurocosmos is one way I am imagining the future. So I create my drag to celebrate my autistic trans Jewish being, imagining what disability justice through drag looks like, and creating visibly disabled drag, and really just imagining a world where all of us are free in our bodies and manifesting a disabled trans future. And the last thing I'll say is that I root all of my drag choreography and movements in my autistic stems. So you'll see flapping hands like incorporated into my movements among many other things. So my disabled movement is integral to how I move as a drag performer.
Amazing. Oh my God. Let me just tell you, if you see Neuro's Instagram, you got to follow, first off. Second of all, your moves are so ridiculously amazing. I love your movement when you perform. It is just so poetic and just embracive, and it's like super beautiful. Like I saw it, I was like, I have never seen anything like this in my life, and I loved it. It was so good. So like people
Thank
need
you
to
so
book
much.
you.
It means a lot coming from you.
Thank you. No, like it was just ridiculous. That's the beautiful thing about drag kings. We each have our own style. We each embrace and express ourselves in a special way. And the way you express yourself in your art is just so freaking amazing and beautiful. Like just so inspirational. So amazing. Thank you so much for that. That
Thank
really
you.
this is a podcast about drag kings and about educating people about drag kings and different kinds of drag, and also to be inclusive of other people that need visibility in this drag community. It's very much a need for people to educate themselves about accommodating and bringing more inclusivity to drag shows. So tell me your experience being a disabled drag performer, and what are the kinds of things that you hope the drag community can bring visibility to the disabled community?
So I think there's definitely a like really important like elements of privilege to acknowledge in my experience as a disabled drag performer, in that I am white. That definitely like does impact sort of the opportunities in that regard. So I would say that most like the drag artists in local community I'm in are some version of disabled slash neurodivergent, but may not identify as such for a wide variety of reasons, often due to this role not being a safe place for Black, Indigenous, Latino, trans working class folks to openly identify as disabled. So a lot of me being able to do that and is through the white privilege that I do have. And I think one of the things I try to blame my way to my drag is that I did initially come from the DC disability rights space, where I was in disabled activist communities that have I would say they're like with disabilities. There's like both a descriptive understanding, which is you identify as, like, you're disabled, identify as such, and there's also political understanding where you understand, like, your disabled identity as a political one, and those disabled activist spaces experience their identities as the personal and the political. I shifted into drag spaces because, unfortunately, a lot of the disabled activist spaces I'm in didn't have a nuanced understanding of, like, of trans justice, racial justice, and class justice that there needed to be in the spaces that I was in the drag community. Like, I was in is predominantly Black, Indigenous, Latina, trans working class folks, and a lot of people are, like, as I said, like, are part disability umbrella in some form, but seeing, like, a performer doing drag with a political and personal understanding of disability is more new. And I would say that, like, with the Disabled Delight, has been going really strong, and I will, like, acknowledge that I did get the opportunity less than a year into drag, and that was largely through the support of the drag queen Desiree Dick, who helped me get that, who, like, created the opportunity within the space that she was in, and that has really allowed me to create, like, an audience of a sale drag show, create an environment where the artists around me know that it is okay to be in this show without necessarily identifying explicitly with the word disabled, but no, this is a space for them to perform whatever they want. And it cultivates a much more visibly disabled audience than there traditionally is at drag shows. So I feel that Disabled Delight has, even though it's been like 3 shows, and we'll definitely be back next year, it has really cultivated an audience of disabled queer folks coming out to the shows, and drag artists in my community, like, being supportive of it and knowing that this is a space for them that they can perform in as well.
That's goosebumps. So good. It's so important, especially because I have a lot of friends of mine that are disabled performers, especially here in Los Angeles. There are a lot of venues that don't accommodate to people with disabilities or neurodivergency, and it's something that needs to be more talked about. I feel in the queer spaces that there needs to be accommodation for people with disabilities and neurodivergency. And I feel like there's an importance to highlight them and give them their flowers for just being such beautiful performers, because the beautiful thing I feel about the disabled performers that I look up to, they are just they're so proud of who they are. They're so proud of what they're able to conquer, and they let nothing, like, get them down at all. And they just make beautiful art that is just so unique and just so embracive. I think that there's a lot of people in the drag world that don't really think of that as an importance, and there needs to be more visibility about that. I know for myself, I'm just an ally. I'm an able person. I'm very lucky for that. But I think it needs to be said that we need to take care of our family in the community it's the they are disabled people with the capability of everybody else. And we as a community, we're always about being there for one another and giving each other space. But we also need to do that to our community that not all venues accommodate to. Right. So
Yeah.
if you have any opinions about this is just me
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
ally,
So
but you could talk about that more into it.
yeah, I love to. So yeah, the DC has the same issue as many of those across the US and the world, that most queer venues are not accessible. Disabled Delight is in one of the few venues that is wheelchair accessible for drag. And it's also one of the few venues that has a, like, practice of ASL interpretation, like, for their drag shows. So part of how Disabled Delight is successful is because I have a relationship with venue that was already doing that work, and, like, before Disabled Delight existed. but generally most of the venues I have performed in are not physically accessible at all. A lot of them are like maybe the first floor is accessible, but the second floor where the event space is not accessible. I've also performed a lot of venues where, okay, the stage is in a venue, the performance space, like the disabled person can get through the door, but the stage isn't accessible. And getting to the dressing room isn't. So some venues are designed with the assumption that there will be disabled audience members, but they can't imagine a disabled performer on the stage or using the dressing room. And so like as producer, that definitely I have an ethical, I will only produce a show in a space where both the spaces for performers and the spaces for audience is accessible. And that is an ethical thing I stand by. I can't afford like financially to only perform in like accessible venues, but as a producer, I can make the ethical decision because I have the ability to do that from a producing level, if not as a performer. Like, so I would say that like drag communities, I think ASL interpretation understanding has gotten a bit better in my drag community, and there generally is their understandings around mental health, but a lot of the things around accessibility involves challenging venue owners who hold a lot of power over drag performers, and we depend on them like for financial income. So a lot of the issues around collective access in drag involves that like a lot of drag artists want these accessible changes, but haven't necessarily had the learning spaces and tools to like create those accessible spaces yet, and how to make them more accessible. And a lot of the power around an accessible building is in the hands of the venue owners in charge of it, who are often less willing to challenge status quos and the drag artists like performing in those venues are.
You said it best. You said it better than I did. Oh my God. I love this. So yeah, see, this is a topic I really wanted to talk about because like I said, I have many friends that are identify as being disabled artists, and like they are just the best people, and they're also like some of the best artists I've ever seen in my life. And what makes me really sad and really angry about it is that there aren't a lot of venues that take initiative, at least to make an alternative, to make it more accessible for people with disabilities, especially performers. It's like, it kind of seems as though like they think that there aren't going to be performers that have disabilities. Like they're going to be great for an audience, but they're not going to actually perform. But it's like, homie, they can perform whatever the fuck they want. If they want to perform, they can fucking do it. Like, why are we limiting the possibilities? Drag is for everybody. That means straight. That means able-bodied. That means with people with disabilities, neurodivergency. Everybody is fucking welcome to drag. So why the fuck are we limiting the accessibility, like, and accommodations, like, to just able-bodied people?
Yeah, I think kind of things I know is like again, like my experience different for a lot of my drag artist counterparts in that like I was diagnosed with my disabilities early. I went through kind of the disability accommodations kind of systems and the aspects of school that during a lot of the Black, Indigenous, Latina like drag artists that I work with like are diagnosed later in life, like after they've gone through school. So navigating the process of disability accommodations comes at like a different stage of their lives, because with me, I navigated that much earlier in my life. And drag is very different as workplace where everything is less formalized and conceptually. So if asking for accommodation, like for me, is more like going to the person like who's like in control of the lighting and saying like, hey, as a heads up, please do not flash the lights for when I'll perform for a disability related reason, and they make that adjustment. So it's more through a spoken kind of language process and through a less formalized process. And our drag artists around me, like Norris's process, there's less like discussion around in our drag community of like how to do self-advocacy around those things, how to advocate for those accommodations, or that you can ask for this accommodation, that like oh, you can ask for that lighting change. So it's more like a lot of us need to have conversations like with each other about you can ask for this accommodation, you can ask for this adjustment. How the issues around diagnosis work very much directly affect like how many of the drag artists of color in my community have the resources that need and advocacy that they need to ask for those accommodations.
Glad that we're on this subject because I actually was going to ask you, what are some things, I don't know if it's like advice, but what are some things that you can recommend or that you would like to see as far as accommodating to people with disabilities at shows?
Yeah. So I think again, first off, like checking out the venue physically before deciding like if it's the right call, like seeing like can people get through that entrance? Because not just getting through the entrance, like is that doorway wide enough? In that sense, is the venue willing to pay the ASL interpreters? Because venues should be paying the ASL interpreters. It should not be out of pocket from the drag artist producer. That it should be an expense on the venue, and the venue needs to be paying for those interpreters. I think it's also with bathrooms being accessible as well and with gender neutral options. So it's also evaluating the space and having those conversations with the owners. A lot of venues will be very against like masks required drag show and events. So you may need to consider the option of exploring outside the traditional queer bar circuit and kind of look into spaces that are more progressive, those things, and organizing more outside of the queer bar dominance areas, I think is an important element to consider, because a lot of venues impact, because they don't allow mask required like shows, that does impact the ability for drag shows to really center all disabled like folks as much possible. I think with producers, especially to white disabled drag artists, I generally with Disabled Delight, what I do is my policy is that I'm given a budget for me plus 3 other artists. So I try and make sure that either I'm the only white person performing or I only cast 1 other white person, so that 50% or more of the cast is Black, Indigenous drag artists. A lot of white disabled drag shows tend to make the issues of when starting out of having more majority white cast, because white disabled drag artists can be more open about specifically identifying as disabled. So I want to emphasize the importance of centering Black, Indigenous, Latina folks in your disabled drag show casts, and actively working and centering them in those shows, and really phrasing like the language around the show in a way that makes it clear that you do not have to explicitly identify with this word if you're under the umbrella in this any forms. Like, for example, if you have asthma, that is under the disability umbrella. You can do show. Like if you have anxiety and depression, if you have substance use disability, like the show is for you. So it's kind of like making like framework adjustments to like educate people on how wide the disability umbrella is, because a lot of people do not have that information. So I think like a lot of the advice that I would share producers is that a lot of it is the practice of ensuring the space is physically accessible, having your practices in place and knowing, and it's also cultural. The disability justice, in order to achieve that liberation, is not just knowing the right issues are, it's also the justice and cultural side. Disability justice has more of the cultural focus of but basically a lot of cultural attitude shifts also need to happen to really center disabled performers on the stage, not just the ensuring people get in the door.
I'm learning so much right now. This is awesome. I never thought, oh my God, I never thought that there was an umbrella like term as far as that. Wow, that is.
No, I just thought of it as kind of like I kind of like articulate it's kind of like there's a disability, like sort of think of it as an umbrella sort of that way, because a lot of people think of disability as a more narrow-minded thing. Like the way that neurodivergent was specifically defined, like for example, like was that anyone whose mind is considered by our society to be like outside the norm. that contains a wide variety of options, and neurotypical is someone whose mind is considered to fit society's idea of normal. So that's kind of more the explanations I try to go with the framework, that it's not this narrow thing that we're often very taught that is. It's actually this.
I'm very glad that the universe has put us together, because this conversation has really made me very not only happy in the heart to just like meet you, because I am like obsessed with you now. but also I recently am kind of realizing that I might be neurodivergent as far as um like ADHD. I've had seizure disorder since I was 12 years old. I have PTSD, depression, anxiety, and it's very terrifying to, like you said earlier, like being a Latinx person, it's kind of terrifying to even explore that, because it makes, at least in our culture, right, it kind of makes it seem like, oh, like something's wrong with you, like it's just this or it's just that, and it's like, no, it happens and it's okay, and it's not going to stop anybody from trying to be the best person they can be or changing the world in any way. It just is another part of you that's, fucking there. And you just kind of have to
Yeah.
accept it. So being on this call with you and just talking to you about these things and just hearing you be an amazing rock star that you are is just something that I feel like gay Jesus wanted me to listen to today. So I'm so glad that you connected with me, and just thank you for being a part of this show, and just this episode is just really special to me, especially after Christmas. This is the best Christmas gift ever, honestly.
I'm
But
so glad. I think I first heard of you, it was through the Vox Drag Kings videos, because my dear friend Molasses
yes.
was in it, and Molasses and Black Dynamite were the two drag kings who produced the show that I did my drag debut in. So like the
Yeah.
the space that created like the first platform for Neuro Cosmos, that was very much thanks to Molasses.
Shout out to King Molasses. If you don't know King
Yes.
Molasses, you better know King Molasses. I love that homie. Yeah, he came to LA. We with some brunchies.
Oh,
It was
I love
great.
that. They're doing incredible. They're
Amazing. Okay, so I have to ask, what are your goals with your new show? Like, what are some goals that you would love to accomplish?
Oh yeah, that is really cool to imagine and think about. 'Cause I definitely did not realize when I first started performing that I would be producing a show less than a year into drag. September a couple months ago was my 1 year of drag.
Yes.
Yes. So I've definitely like a lot of milestones at Rice, like that is incredible, and I've definitely onto books like some incredible artists in the show already, like Molasses and Ricky Rose, that I've all had in Disabled Delight before, and continuing to like having like a pretty dominant like drag king cast in that show is like something I definitely want to continue. I think with the next year 2024, like continue having the all autistic drag show for Autism Acceptance Month, which was Disabled Delight's first show as an all autistic cast. I think something I
Yes.
would personally be interested and want to explore is the possibility, again talking with kind of venue of having like a Black Disabled edition hosted by a Black drag artist who is comfortable in that role and who I'm like comfortable like trusting with the show. I do feel like it's important for me to step back sometimes
Yeah.
because I'm white. That obviously is going to impact who the audience of Disabled Delight is made up of, and like how the show is. And I want to be more intentional about creating a space where it's not just me all the time. I know what happens when white disabled people hold on to power a bit too long, and I try to think it's important, like as part of that, to know when to step back, and knowing that, intentionally ensuring that like a Black artist or Indigenous drag artist like has the reins to do what they want the show, and use that to like hopefully help support Black, Indigenous, Latina artists and create disabled space for themselves. Like, I do not want Disabled Delight to be the only option.
Yeah.
I do not want people to view the existence of more options as competition. No, I do not come into this with a competition mindset. I do not do drag competitions as an individual personally. That has never been a reason I got into drag or want to do it. I came into it for specifically art activism reasons. So I think one of the biggest goals for Disabled Delight is to continue and do better on the end of centering Black, Indigenous drag artists in Disabled Delight, and making that happen. And I think a lot of the direction is like it's still very new in terms of like discovering like what could come next. And so like a lot of the what do I want to do next is still something that I'm still figuring out in my mind and still evaluating, like to what extent like the aspects of a drag community is ready for certain things. But I'd say the biggest kind of some of the cultural shifts again that I want to see, that I hope the show can help with, and I can definitely talk more about, I think is both a lot of people are sort of like in the are solely in an inclusion mindset, and inclusion is great, but often inclusion asks who is in the room and stops there, and that way, so a lot of people are at the inclusion stage of like how can we be more inclusive, and that is great, but like I know it's the same thing in disability rights spaces I used to work in as well, that thought about the inclusion part, but that didn't mean that they're going to the justice part of how do we question the system we're currently in and create a liberatory one that really centers us and is created for us already challenging the systems of inequality in that they're in. So I want to see like drag artists like Disabled Delight push that in more, and pushing people to make question those things, because we're at the inclusion part. It's seeing, can we even go further beyond that? I want to see, I think, Disabled like contribute to really both definitely shifting the conversations on sexuality that is much needed, both in the sense because drag is a very like sexuality based art form. I think both in the sense of having as little engagement that in as little or as much as you want is totally okay. But I think one of the central negative thing I've experienced in the drag world is actually that I get desexualized a lot. I've been desexualized by, I have been desexualized by drag queens. I have been infantilized in those ways, and that I think that definitely impacts how see and drag. So a lot of why I really try to really center my sexuality like in my performances is to challenge those things, and also that no matter how sexual I am, I shouldn't be desexualized. But often I am infantilized. I shouldn't have to be in order to disprove more, in a position where people, I think, expect me to have to prove it more. I think a lot of drag artists around me, like the consent, the issues around consent is about like hypersexualizing someone. And so there's hypersexualizing someone, which you're violating their consent by viewing them like as a sexual object, by like using that to harm them. But I think what I see less in drag space is the understanding that desexualizing someone also violates their consent. When I am infantilized or like talked down to with a different tone of voice, which is different from some other trans mass drag queens who are not openly disabled. A lot of them have not gotten talked to in a different tone of voice. But like I have experienced that from experience, like a drag queen, insinuate that I shouldn't like be hearing like conversations about substances or like more partying sort of thing. So there's an attitude of like especially drag artists with developmental disabilities like shouldn't be exposed to certain things, and that's still prevalent in drag community. And like so when I am like touched without my consent, it's instead coming from a desexualized standpoint of because I don't view you as having the capability of understanding or knowing sexuality, I can do this to you. And that is slightly different from hypersexualizing someone, but they are both violating like consent. So I try to do with disabled delight, or aspire to do, is that I want to see like drag arts really be a space where all of they express themselves like whatever your sexuality is, you do on the floor, and you do not have to go through those questions of being hypersexualized. And I'm lucky to do that in a venue in which most of the audience members do non-consensual touch to the performers, and that there is a policy of like if you touch the performer without their consent, like you're out of here. So I'm lucky to have a venue that is more like that, but kind of going to the cultural conversation of like, this is how I get treated by some drag queens when, as an autistic drag artist, they're going to treat potential drag artists with Down syndrome and intellectual disabilities who may enter drag space a lot worse than me. Like that is definitely something I feel needs to be discussed along with the hypersexualizing conversation that we're having, because they're both issues of consent within drag spaces. They're both issues of being not just uncomfortable with, but trying to suppress like disabled sexuality in whatever form that is. And so I hope to do with like even more disabled delight, since our performers can do whatever they want, specific thing, that it's a space where disabled artists can and will like own their sexuality in their way on stage in the ways that we want to, outside of the expectations of being a desexualized being or being a hypersexualized being.
I mean, okay, not gonna lie, that kind of pissed me off. Like, like I mean, like, I guess in a way people are trying to quote unquote be respectful, but at the same time, it's like, homie, like, I mean, I was looking at your Instagram, the way you move, and I was like, that homie probably gets some girls like crazy. Like, homie knows how to get it. Like, I'm like, I was like, let's go. Like, give that king some dollar bills for sure. But it's like to hear that they just kind of like just dehumanize you, and just like it's kind of the stereotype that like that's seen a lot in film and television of like with people with like disabilities or anything like that, like they're asexual beings. But it's like, no, everybody has a sexuality, everybody has their liberty and freedoms to express themselves and their sexuality however the hell they want.
I think I intentionally use desexualize because it happens a lot of disabled space too. A lot of asexual and desexualizing so often gets conflated.
Oh, got it.
So when I say like owning like your sexuality, I'm absolutely including like asexual folks in that, and I'm on demi-ro and demisexual myself, and it's definitely more difficult to be open about that in drag spaces due to the like issues around sexuality that I've mentioned, and kind of things that happened like when I was in disabled activist spaces of there often be this thing from disabled folks who are allo or the opposite of ace, who would fight back against desexualization by saying like you shouldn't view me because I'm a sexual being, and like that makes me human, and so there's often this issue of like, and there's a really good podcast episode from the ace couple that does a really good job talking about this issue with in the ableism ace phobia confusion because of the histories within communities of like disabled people getting desexualized and ace folks often being framed like as they met a disability. A lot of people like try to fight back against those things by saying that like, I'm not disabled, there's nothing wrong with me. And with on the disabled side of things of kind of like, I'm a sexual being, there's nothing wrong with me. So I would say like there is nothing wrong with being an asexual disabled person. There's nothing wrong with being an aromantic or demisexual or demi-romantic, whatever the umbrella of that is. What happens is because those histories, the being very clear that was happening to ace disabled folks and disabled allo folks, like, is the desexualization, like desexualizing someone is the process of taking away sexual agency from somebody, is, and like regardless of where your sexuality is. So like that's why I'm very clear, like with like desexualizing someone is the process of taking away that agency from both ace folks and allo folks, while asexual like is the identity, is the attraction piece, because there are a lot of people, like when trying to challenge the desexualization, the dehumanization issues that happen, both communities tend to conflate the two and say certain things about the humanity of the other group by and that can lead into so that they gently like called you in there.
No. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I apologize for the miswording of that. Totally, I could have worded it better, but what I was trying to imply that like that society likes to subject individuals or groups of individuals in a space that they might not associate themselves with, as far as like there's able people and there's people with disabilities that are asexual. I myself am demisexual. So, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah. So I understand that. And, like everybody, it's so funny because whenever I perform, they're like, oh, yeah, you're so sexy. I was like, yeah, but I don't feel anything for you down there at all.
I was saying,
I'm
like
like,
I definitely feel like it's like I am performing. I generally like when I flirt with somebody else, I generally pick someone like who I like know at least a little bit, because it's definitely a bit harder to interact with strangers. Like I'm very aware of how much of a performance it is when it happens.
exactly. And it's so funny because it's like, people are like, I would never expect you. I would never think that you're demisexual. And I'm like, I'm look, just because I'm moving my hips, I'm grinding like I'm Magic Mike does not mean I'm not demisexual. Like, asexual, like pansexual, any kind of sexual expression, romantic, anything of all kinds of sexual orientation. Like there is
Oh yeah,
no.
it's just kind of like when I do like I have like one of my like best numbers is like I used to fill in, which is a Jewish ritual object made of leather, and I use it for like as like very weird like Jewish leather cake, and people are like, wait, this is this is
Yes.
pink. Wait, you're doing cake.
Yes.
And
Oh
you're
my
like, I know this
God.
is religious, but wait.
Oh, trust me
so
on that.
I
Yep.
so I use like sort of the whole like people not expecting me to be sexual to be like, here is kink. Here's my version of kink. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's just our form of expressing ourselves and our sexuality. And everybody has that freedom, and everybody should do whatever the fuck they want. If they want to express themselves and their sexuality through drag, that's great. If like, but I think what I was trying to clarify was just like that there are a lot of people in society that just label people based on what they think they are. And it's not fair, because just because we like to express ourselves in a certain ways, or we present ourselves in a certain way in life, doesn't mean that we're stereotypical type of people that you think that we are, or anything like that, so it's like anybody can be asexual or and still want to sexualize themselves on stage.
Yes.
There are you have that liberty to do that. It's your form of drag. You do whatever you want with that. But you don't categorize people just because you believe that, oh, well, like in this case, it's like, oh, well, they're disabled. So they're probably, asexual. They're not, sexy. And it's like, homie, get your shit in order. Like, no,
Yeah.
no. Maybe they are asexual. Maybe they're not. Did you ask them? No. So how about you ask before you say anything?
Yeah, it has been pretty. Yeah, I haven't gotten this like from other drag canes like yet. At the moment, I say yet.
Yeah.
Generally, the very much the reason why I'm here and able to do what I do is because of the support of the cane around me. It has mainly been an issue of like queens who have been in the scene for a longer like period of time that like I've experienced that from, and it's definitely kind of enough of an ongoing thing of however like this is a thing we need to challenge alongside the hypersexualizing.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And thank you for bringing awareness to that. And thank you for having this really amazing conversation with me and educating me about that. Really
Of
appreciate
course,
it.
yeah.
And so I think I have one last question for you. As far as your drag, where do you want to go with your drag? Is there any kind of goals or expectations that you would like to accomplish within the next year or anything like that? Whatever. What do you want to do with your drag?
Oh, yeah. So I think it's definitely development. Like I'm now like more Jewish with my drag and trying to use that kind of in building connections with Free Palestine spaces. I've gotten into the realm of doing like Jewish drag shows, like specifically with one of my fellow Canes. So I really want to keep bringing like Jewish values and drag shows together. I think with my drag direction, I think I really thrive best when like creating like conceptual numbers where I have kind of more the freedom to do I want to do. I definitely have struggled with that tension of like I think the best of like conceptual versus commercial, and I know I thrive more like when I'm creating a conceptual route. I know that my numbers take time to create, and I try to embrace that. I think drag, I want to keep performing, keep expanding disabled delight within the next year, sort of building those collaborations. And I also like want to see like non-traditional kind of ways of exploring drag. Of kind of, I think Hollow Eve like mentioned to me that like, they're like one conversation. They're like, if you do like a movement on like an installation off movement, that would be really cool. And that kind of like sparked the idea of kind of like, oh, okay, more in like non-traditional like performance art ways of drag that I do enjoy, because I realize I do enjoy creating like longer pieces, and drag spaces are definitely an element where like people do want a more like shorter like number like sometimes. So like I'm still kind of figuring out within the next year of like where I want to grow, but I want to keep building upon what I'm doing already and want to build more community around this. I love the idea one day in the future of like more disabled drag artist collectives, or there are some that like disabled artist collectives, like obviously like Sins Invalid that already exist, but I think drag being present in disabled artist collectives is still more new, and I feel drag could really be a powerful like mover and shaker in that world. So I want to see like more, I think, collective kind of organizing and creating disabled drag, creating disabled art and like in drag space, because I think it's because the system is so very individualized right now, and exploring like what can we do like outside of the current structure that we're in, because I feel like a lot of Go My Drag is exploring who we can be outside systems of oppression.
Oh my God, that's so great. Oh my God.
Yay.
You are such a sweetheart. You are so selfless, and I have heard nothing but amazing things about you. And now that I've met you, all of the high expectations are very true and even higher. So thank you so much for getting on this call with me, being a part of this first season of this podcast, and just keep doing what you're doing. Everything that I have seen on you, I am officially obsessed, and I have to come to DC and come see the show. I am so
Yes.
excited.
Like, thank
But
you so much for having me on your podcast. It was really great to meet you, and I've admired your drag for like quite some time since I first learned about you like through that video. And yes, please come to DC. We would love to have you clearly.
yes, oh my God. Well, hopefully that might happen this year. I'm working with a company that we might be in DC, so I will let you know so we can hang out. I would love to see you in person. But
Yes.
oh my God. So please tell the people where they can follow you, where they can follow Disabled Delight, anything that you're involved with. Please let them know where to hit you up.
Yeah, so my drag Instagram is Neuroqueer Cosmos. Neuro Cosmos is already taken. But I think for spelling, I would say neuro as in neurodivergent, queer as in gloriously queer,
Mhm.
and cosmos as in the universe. So at Neuroqueer Cosmos on Instagram. Then I have my Venmo is like at Neuro Cosmos. My Twitter is same. Disabled Delight does have its own account of at Disabled Delight DC. So that's where you can find the updates for Disabled Delight in 2024. And on my profile, you can also see like I have my email on there for bookings, both whether that be for shows and also podcasts like this one.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, whenever you're in LA, hit me up. I would love to have you on my show. Please.
Hey,
Either way, I can't wait to meet you. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. It has been an honor talking with you, and thank you for educating me on the subject and just being yourself. Just thank you so much for being yourself and being such an inspiration for real.
thank you.
So thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Thank you for listening. Please follow all the updates for this podcast on Dapper Puss's Instagram at DapperPussENT. So have a good night, stay dapper, and go follow this bitch. Thank you for listening to Behind the Kingdom with Johnny Gentleman. Please do me a favor and follow us on Instagram at DapperPussENT. That's right, DapperPussENT on Instagram. If you have a topic, have a comment, or anything in between, please do me a favor and email us at dapperpuss@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Instagram. If you want to follow all of our amazing guests, please do me a favor and go and look at the links on our bio. Look at our websites at dapperpussdk.com. And at the end of the day, if you're not supporting drag kings and things, are you really doing drag? I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye.